Ethan Cole has it all: success, wealth, and an upcoming high-profile wedding. But when he invites his ex-girlfriend, Lily Thompson, to the event, he doesn't expect her to confront him about the human cost of his ruthless ambition. Lily's words shake him to his core, leading Ethan on a transformative path from corporate skyscrapers to remote villages in Colombia, where he comes face to face with the lives his choices have affected. Determined to make things right, Ethan sets out to build a new legacy, guided by a purpose he never knew he needed. Will he find the redemption he seeks? Or is it too late to repair the damage done? If you're intrigued by stories of growth and second chances, be sure to subscribe and leave a comment below. What would you do if you were given the chance to make amends? Let's dive into Ethan's journey. Ethan Cole sat alone in his corner office, the New York skyline stretching endlessly beyond the glass walls. The city was alive, lights blinking like distant stars. But inside, the only light came from the soft glow of his desk lamp and the cool, blue-tinged light of his laptop screen. He glanced at his watch. It was nearly 8. The invitation lay untouched beside him, addressed in precise, flowing calligraphy to Lily Thompson. He hadn't seen her in over a decade, but the name alone stirred something deep within him. It was a feeling he'd buried years ago, one he thought had long since faded into the past. His assistant, Mark, knocked on the door and stepped in, holding a folder thick with contracts. "Mr. Cole, here's the report on the South American development plans," Mark said, his tone professional but edged with the faint nervousness Ethan had come to expect. "Your input is needed by Friday." "Leave it there," Ethan said, nodding toward a stack of papers on the corner of his desk. Mark placed the folder down and then glanced at the envelope with Lily's name on it. "Planning to invite someone special?" Ethan felt a slight tension ripple through him. "An old friend," he replied coolly, waving him off. Mark nodded and left without another word. Alone once more, Ethan picked up the envelope, running his fingers over Lily's name, meticulously written in gold ink. He remembered the last time he'd seen her Boston, 11 years ago, back when his dreams were raw and his ambition had no room for anyone but himself. Lily had been a grounding force in his life, passionate about justice, and filled with a quiet kindness that sometimes felt too bright for the world he was determined to conquer. That was precisely why he had left her behind. She hadn't fit into the vision he'd had of his future. He could still see her face in his mind's eye, hurt but dignified, sitting across from him at that small cafe in Cambridge. "I just don't understand," she'd said, her voice barely above a whisper. "All these plans, why didn't you tell me?" "It's complicated, Lily," he'd replied, trying to keep his tone steady. He told her about a job in California, a promising opportunity he claimed he couldn't pass up. But the truth was, there was no job. He simply didn't want anyone tethering him, keeping him from becoming who he believed he had to be. When he'd walked away that night, he'd told himself it was necessary, that he was doing it for both of them, even if she never understood. But now, as he looked down at the invitation, he felt a pang of something unexpected regret, perhaps, or a distant longing. He wondered, not for the first time, if she'd found happiness, if she'd moved on, if she'd made peace with the man he'd become. He straightened in his chair, his decision made. He would send the invitation, if only to show her how far he had come. There was no harm in letting her see his success, in making her a witness to the life he'd built. With a smirk, he called his assistant back in. "Mark, make sure this invitation reaches Lily Thompson. I want it delivered personally, and I want confirmation of receipt." "Yes, Mr. Cole," Mark replied with a nod, noting the instruction before disappearing into the hall. As he returned to his desk, Ethan poured himself a glass of scotch, swirling it as he gazed out over the glittering city. This was just the beginning. His life was about to take on new heights. He was on the cusp of marrying into a family that could open even more doors. Grace Matthews, heiress to a shipping fortune, beautiful and accomplished, and the perfect complement to his public image. But as he sipped his drink, the thought of seeing Lily again lingered, unshakable and unwelcome, as if her presence might stir up a part of him he'd long buried. He dismissed it, pushing it back to the farthest corner of his mind, unaware of how deeply this decision would come to haunt him. Lily Thompson sat in her small, cozy apartment in downtown Boston, flipping through a stack of case files on her coffee table. She had spent her day at a pro bono clinic, helping a family from El Salvador fight an unfair deportation order. Cases like this drained her, but they also reminded her of why she'd chosen this path. Her phone buzzed, breaking her concentration. She picked it up, surprised to see her name written in flowing calligraphy on an envelope she'd never expected to see. The sender's name struck her: Ethan Cole. She felt a strange mix of emotions rush through her: confusion, curiosity, and an echo of an old hurt she'd almost forgotten. She hadn't thought about Ethan in years, not since he'd left for the West Coast with little more than a vague explanation. She tried to let it go, to move forward and focus on her work, but she couldn't deny the lingering pain of feeling abandoned. Her best friend and colleague, Kate Rivers, walked in, carrying a bottle of wine and a plate of food from their favorite takeout place. "Hey, thought you might be too busy to eat, so I came to save you from yourself," Kate said, setting down the food and flopping onto the couch. "Thanks," Lily said, smiling. But she was still holding the invitation, and Kate noticed. "What's that?" Kate asked, leaning in to look. "Wait, is that from Ethan Cole?" Lily nodded, unable to find the words. Kate shook her head in disbelief. "What does he want?" "An invitation to his wedding," Lily replied, reading the elegant print on the thick, cream-colored card. Kate snorted, rolling her eyes. "Are you serious? After all these years, he sends you this?" Lily shrugged, feeling the old hurt resurface. "I don't know, Kate. Part of me thinks I should just ignore it, but another part of me wonders if maybe I need to see this to see him. Maybe it's time to close that chapter." Kate gave her a skeptical look. "Are you really sure about that? After the way, he just left." Lily hesitated, not entirely certain. "Maybe it's not about him anymore. Maybe it's about seeing how far I've come, too." Kate sighed, pouring them both glasses of wine. "All right, but if you go, I'm coming with you for moral support." They shared a small laugh, but as they sipped their wine, Lily's thoughts drifted back to Ethan. She wondered who he was now, what kind of life he'd built, and if he was still the man who had once been everything to her. Lily leaned against the kitchen counter, watching the steam rise from her morning coffee. Her eyes drifted to the invitation on the counter, still immaculate, untouched since she'd shown it to Kate. She couldn't shake the feeling it brought the way a single name could summon a whirlwind of emotions. A knock at the door jolted her out of her reverie. Kate entered, her expression a mix of curiosity and impatience. "So, any decision yet?" she asked, her gaze drifting toward the invitation. Lily sighed, setting down her coffee. "I don't know. I keep going back and forth. Part of me thinks it's pointless to go, that it's just a way for him to flaunt his success in front of me. But another part," her voice trailed off, and she shook her head. "I think I need to see it for myself, to close that chapter." Kate leaned in, sympathetic but cautious. "All right, but let's make one thing clear. This isn't about him. You don't owe him anything, not closure, not a second chance, nothing. If you go, do it for you, because you're ready to face whatever ghosts you left behind." Lily nodded, feeling a small spark of clarity. "You're right. This isn't about him. It's about proving that I've moved on and that I'm strong enough to handle whatever he might throw my way." Kate smirked. "Then I say you go, and I'll be there, right by your side. Let's show Mr. Cole exactly what he gave up." A small, determined smile formed on Lily's face as she finally picked up the invitation, feeling a quiet resolve settle within her. She would go, but this time, she would be the one in control. Ethan adjusted his tie in the mirror, glancing around the elegant ballroom that had been transformed into a glittering scene of wealth and sophistication. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow over the table set with silver cutlery and white roses. This was his world now, a world of power, of opulence, of the rewards that came with relentless ambition. He felt Grace's hand slip into his, pulling him from his thoughts. "Everything looks perfect, doesn't it?" she asked, her smile bright, her eyes reflecting an unshakable confidence. "Yes, it's exactly what we wanted," he replied, giving her hand a light squeeze. Grace's parents approached, both impeccably dressed, exuding a quiet authority that hinted at generations of old money. Ethan felt a familiar tension tighten in his chest, a reminder that he was marrying into expectations, into a family that saw him as a valuable addition to their legacy. They liked him well enough, but he was aware that he was still an outsider, constantly proving his worth. As the rehearsal dinner began, Ethan scanned the room. His gaze drifted over familiar faces, friends, business associates, people who were here to celebrate what he had become. But when his eyes landed on Lily Thompson, he felt an unexpected jolt, as if the ground had shifted beneath him. She was standing near the entrance, her posture graceful, her eyes scanning the room with a quiet confidence that took him by surprise. She looked different, stronger, more self-assured, her eyes carrying a depth he hadn't seen before. He hadn't expected her to come, and now that she was here, he felt an inexplicable tension twist within him. He moved through the crowd, nodding to a few guests, until he stood in front of her. "Lily, you made it." She looked up, her expression composed but distant. "Hello, Ethan. I figured it was time we had a proper goodbye." Her words were polite, but there was an edge to them that he hadn't anticipated. "I'm glad you came," he replied, trying to keep his tone light. "It's been a long time." She nodded, her gaze steady. "Yes, it has. You've done well for yourself, Ethan. This is impressive." He could tell that she meant it, but there was a quiet reserve in her voice, a sense of restraint. It stung him in a way he couldn't quite understand. He had expected admiration, perhaps a hint of regret. Instead, there was a calm self-possession that unnerved him. Grace appeared beside him, sliding her arm around his. "Hi, I'm Grace." She introduced herself warmly, her smile as polished as ever. Lily extended her hand, her smile polite. "Lily Thompson. I'm an old friend of Ethan's." Grace's eyes brightened with curiosity. "Oh, I've heard so much about you," she said, her enthusiasm unfeigned. "Ethan told me all about his college days." Lily's smile didn't falter, but Ethan could sense the quiet tension behind it. "I'm sure he did," she replied smoothly. "Congratulations on your engagement. I wish you both all the best." Grace's smile softened. "Thank you. It means a lot to have Ethan's friends here. He's come so far, and this is only the beginning." Ethan forced a smile, feeling a strange discomfort at the exchange. As Grace excused herself to speak with her parents, he turned back to Lily, finding it difficult to read her expression. "So, you're a lawyer now?" he asked, attempting to fill the silence. "Yes, I am," she replied simply. "I work with families and children in need, those who don't have anyone else to fight for them." Ethan nodded, feeling a flicker of unease. "That's very noble of you." She met his gaze, her expression steady. "It's not about nobility, Ethan. It's about purpose." Her words lingered between them, weighted with a meaning that felt far deeper than he was prepared to face. Purpose. He hadn't thought about that word in years, not since he'd left her, not since he'd chosen power and ambition over everything else. The silence stretched, uncomfortable and charged. Finally, Lily glanced around the room. "Well, I should go. I just wanted to say hello and wish you well." Before he could respond, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Ethan stood alone, feeling a strange emptiness settle within him, a hollow ache that he couldn't explain. Ethan stared out at the city, the lights of New York twinkling in the distance. He had everything he'd ever wanted: a thriving business, wealth, a beautiful fiancée who would make the perfect partner. Yet, he felt a growing unease, a restless ache that he couldn't seem to shake. His thoughts drifted back to his conversation with Lily. Her words, her calm confidence, they had unsettled him in a way he hadn't anticipated. He'd expected admiration, maybe even jealousy, but instead, he'd been met with a quiet strength that left him feeling strangely vulnerable. He poured himself a drink, taking a long sip as he tried to suppress the feelings that were rising within him. He'd chosen this life, built it from the ground up, sacrificed everything for it. He told himself that it was worth it, that leaving Lily, abandoning any attachments, was the only way to succeed. But now, as he stood here, alone in his penthouse, he couldn't help but wonder if he'd given up more than he'd gained. A knock at the door broke through his thoughts. He opened it to find Mark, his assistant, looking concerned. "Mr. Cole, there's something you should see," Mark said, holding out his phone. Ethan took it, glancing at the screen. It was an article from a small news outlet, covering a report on his company's involvement in a controversial land development project in South America. The project had displaced several local families, causing an outcry from human rights organizations. He felt his stomach tighten as he scrolled through the article, the accusations hitting him like a blow. He had signed off on the project without much thought, trusting his team to handle the details. Now, he realized the consequences of his choices were far more significant than he'd allowed himself to consider. "Thank you, Mark," he said, handing the phone back with a heavy sigh. As he closed the door, he felt a wave of dread settle over him. He'd always known there were risks in the business world, but he hadn't expected those risks to come back to haunt him like this. For the first time, he wondered if he'd built his empire on foundations that could crumble at any moment. And in the quiet of his empty apartment, he couldn't shake the thought that he might be on the brink of losing everything he'd worked so hard to achieve. Lily was packing her suitcase, the invitation lying open on the bed beside her, when Kate walked in. "Still planning to go?" Kate asked, her tone a mix of curiosity and caution. "Yes," Lily replied, folding a dress and placing it carefully into her bag. "But not just for the reasons I thought." Kate raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Lily hesitated, gathering her thoughts. "I looked up some recent news on Ethan's company. He's been involved in some questionable projects. Specifically, a land development project in Colombia that's displaced entire families. I think I need to see him, to ask him directly if it's true." Kate's eyes widened. "Lily, are you sure that's a good idea? What if he's the same person who left you behind without a second thought? You know he's changed his life to fit into that world. Maybe this is just another example of that." Lily sat down on the edge of the bed, her face thoughtful. "I know, but I need to know if he's changed. If he's truly become someone who can just push people aside for his own gain. Maybe that'll help me put everything to rest." Kate nodded slowly, her concerns softening into understanding. "All right, but promise me one thing. Whatever you find out, remember that you're going for you, not for him." Lily nodded, grateful for Kate's support. As she zipped up her suitcase, she couldn't shake the feeling that this journey would be more than just about closure. It was a chance to confront her own beliefs, to see if the man she'd once loved was truly gone or if there was still a part of him worth saving. The day of the wedding arrived with all the splendor Ethan had envisioned. The Matthews estate was transformed into an oasis of opulence, with white rose bouquets lining the walkways and golden lights strung in intricate patterns overhead. Guests gathered in elegant attire, chatting and mingling, a buzz of excitement and anticipation in the air. Lily arrived with Kate by her side, both of them dressed impeccably, though Lily felt a slight unease settle in her stomach as they stepped onto the estate grounds. She glanced around, taking in the scene, feeling like a stranger in a world she had once thought might be hers. As they moved through the crowd, Lily felt eyes on her curious, speculative glances from people who recognized her name from college days. She caught a glimpse of Ethan across the crowd, his back to her, as he spoke with a group of business associates. She hesitated, not sure if she was ready to approach him, but Kate nudged her forward. "This is why you're here," Kate whispered. "Go talk to him." Lily took a deep breath and made her way over. Ethan turned, and when he saw her, a flicker of surprise crossed his face, quickly replaced by a smile that seemed practiced, almost too polished. "Lily," he said, his tone warm but guarded. "You made it." "I did," she replied, her voice steady. "I thought it was time we caught up properly." They moved to a quieter corner of the garden, where the sound of music and laughter faded into the background. For a moment, there was only silence between them, a tension that neither seemed able to break. "So, you're really going through with it," Lily said, nodding toward the preparations around them. Ethan looked around, a touch of pride in his eyes. "Yes, this is the life I wanted, Lily. The life I worked for." She searched his face, looking for any sign of the man she'd once known. "Is it really what you want?" she asked quietly. "Or is it just what you think you should want?" He looked away, his expression tightening. "I don't see how that matters. This is my choice." Lily's gaze hardened, her voice taking on a sharper edge. "And what about the choices that your company makes, Ethan? The choices that affect real people, people who can't fight back? I read about your project in Colombia. Families were forced from their homes because of you. Ethan's face darkened, and for a moment, she saw a flash of something raw, something vulnerable. But he quickly masked it, his voice turning cold. Business is complicated, Lily. You know that. Not everyone can be saved. Her jaw tightened, a surge of anger welling up inside her. Is that how you justify it? By saying, not everyone can be saved? He shook his head, dismissing her words. You don't understand. You work with individuals, one case at a time. But when you're dealing with something on this scale, sacrifices have to be made. Lily took a step back, feeling as if she were looking at a stranger. I thought you were better than this, Ethan. I thought you had a purpose beyond just accumulating wealth. Ethan's gaze shifted, a brief flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. But before he could respond, Grace appeared, calling his name. There you are, she said with a radiant smile, oblivious to the tension between them. Everyone's waiting for you. It's almost time. Ethan turned back to Lily, his expression unreadable. I have to go. I'm glad you came, Lily. I hope you find what you're looking for. She watched him walk away, feeling a hollowness settle in her chest. She had come here to confront him, to find closure, but instead, she felt as if she'd only uncovered more questions. Ethan stood alone in a small room off the main hall, adjusting his tie in front of a gilded mirror. His conversation with Lily replayed in his mind, her words haunting him, planting seeds of doubt that he couldn't ignore. A knock at the door startled him, and he turned to find Miriam Cole, his mother, standing there with a soft, sad smile. Mom, he said surprised, I didn't know you were here. She stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. Of course, I'm here. I wouldn't miss this for the world. She paused, looking him over with a mixture of pride and concern. You look handsome, Ethan, but you don't look happy. He sighed, turning away from the mirror. It's just nerves, Mom. That's all. But Miriam's gaze remained steady, piercing through his defenses. Are you sure that's all it is? Because I can see something in your eyes, something that tells me you're not as certain as you say. Ethan felt a surge of frustration, but also a flicker of vulnerability he hadn't felt in years. I've worked my whole life for this, he said quietly. For success, for respect. This is what I wanted. Miriam nodded, her expression gentle. But is it what you need? He looked down, unable to answer. His mother stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. I know I can't make your choices for you, Ethan, but don't lose sight of who you are. Don't forget the things that used to matter to you. With that, she gave his shoulder a reassuring squeeze and left the room, leaving him alone with his thoughts. He stood there, staring at his reflection, feeling a sense of conflict growing within him. For the first time, he questioned the path he'd chosen, wondering if it had truly been worth the cost. As the guests settled into their seats, Lily stood off to the side, watching as Grace walked down the aisle, her dress a vision of elegance and perfection. Ethan waited at the altar, his expression unreadable, but Lily could sense the tension in his stance, the uncertainty in his eyes. As Grace reached the altar, a hush fell over the crowd, the air thick with anticipation. But just as the officiant began to speak, a voice rang out from the back of the gathering. I'm sorry, I can't do this. All eyes turned to Ethan, who had stepped back from the altar, his face pale, his expression conflicted. Grace looked at him in shock, her hand flying to her mouth as the guests murmured in surprise. Ethan, she whispered, her voice trembling. What's going on? He took a deep breath, his gaze shifting to Lily, who stood frozen, watching him with a mixture of shock and sadness. For a moment, he held her gaze, feeling the weight of all the decisions he'd made, all the people he'd left behind. I thought this was what I wanted, he said, his voice barely audible. But I was wrong. I've been wrong about so many things. Grace's face crumpled, her expression turning to one of betrayal. Ethan, please don't do this to me. He shook his head, regret and sorrow etched into his features. I'm sorry, Grace. I can't go through with this. I need to figure out who I am before I can make promises to anyone. He turned, walking away from the altar, leaving the crowd in stunned silence. As he passed Lily, he paused, meeting her gaze one last time. "Thank you," he said softly, "for helping me see the truth." And with that, he walked away, disappearing into the shadows, leaving behind the life he had built and the man he had become. Ethan awoke in his apartment, sunlight streaming in through the floor-to-ceiling windows, but he felt none of the warmth or comfort he usually did. Instead, he felt an overwhelming sense of emptiness. The weight of his decision at the altar lay heavy on him. He'd walked away from everything he thought he wanted, and now he was left with nothing but questions. As he made his way into the kitchen, his phone began to buzz with a flood of missed calls and messages from colleagues, family, and even reporters, all demanding answers. He ignored them, feeling the need to be alone, to gather his thoughts and face the silence that now seemed deafening. Later that morning, a knock at the door interrupted his solitude. Opening it, he found his mother, Miriam, standing there, her face filled with concern and understanding. "I heard what happened," she said softly, stepping inside and giving him a warm hug. "Are you all right?" Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, Mom. I thought I had everything figured out, but now, I don't know if any of it matters anymore." Miriam took his hand, guiding him to sit down on the couch. "Sometimes, we realize too late that the things we thought were important aren't what truly matter. But it's not too late to find something real, Ethan. Maybe this is your chance to rediscover what you left behind." He looked at her, his mind returning to his conversation with Lily, her piercing questions, her challenge to his moral compass. "Maybe you're right. I think I need to see the impact of what I've done. The truth, not just the numbers." Miriam nodded, her expression a mix of relief and worry. "Do what you need to do, Ethan. But promise me one thing. Don't forget who you are in the process. Because no matter how far you feel you've fallen, there's always a way back." Medellin, Colombia, 2 weeks later. Ethan's flight touched down in Medellin under a bright, unforgiving sun. The air was thick with humidity, and he felt the weight of the moment as he stepped off the plane. For years, he had signed contracts, approved plans, and accepted reports without question, trusting his team to handle the finer details. But now, as he stood on Colombian soil, he realized he was finally here to face the consequences firsthand. An NGO representative, Carlos Ramirez, met him at the airport. Carlos was a local activist who had been working tirelessly on behalf of the displaced families and communities impacted by Ethan's company's development project. "Mr. Cole," Carlos greeted him, his tone cordial but tinged with skepticism. "Thank you for coming. We have a long day ahead of us. I hope you're prepared." Ethan nodded, feeling a nervous edge in his voice. "I want to see it all, Carlos. I need to understand what happened here." Carlos gave him a curt nod, and they climbed into a rugged jeep that would take them deep into the affected areas. As they drove, the bustling cityscape faded into rural villages, the landscape shifting from the comforts of modern life to the stark reality of underdeveloped areas. Ethan felt a pang of guilt with every mile, each turn revealing more of what he had neglected to see before. They arrived at the first village just as the midday sun beat down, casting a harsh light over the rows of makeshift shelters that now served as temporary housing for displaced families. As Ethan stepped out of the jeep, he was struck by the sight of children playing in the dirt, their laughter incongruent with the stark surroundings. They ran barefoot, their clothes worn and patched, yet they smiled as they played, oblivious to the hardships around them. Carlos led Ethan to a group of villagers gathered under a large tree for shade. An elderly woman stepped forward, her face lined with age and resilience. "Mr. Cole," Carlos translated, "this is Maria Alvarez. Her family has lived on this land for generations, but they were forced to leave when your company began clearing the area for development." Ethan met Maria's gaze, feeling the weight of her grief and the unspoken pain in her eyes. She spoke, her words steady and filled with emotion, and Carlos translated, each sentence hitting Ethan like a blow. She says that her family's home was torn down, the crops they depended on were destroyed, and they had nowhere to go. Now they live in these makeshift homes, surviving on what little they can. Ethan swallowed, struggling to find his voice. "I am sorry. I didn't understand. I didn't know it would come to this." Maria's gaze softened slightly, but there was no forgiveness in her eyes. "You didn't want to know," she replied, her words simple yet searing. "People like you come here and take what you want, and then you leave us to pick up the pieces." Ethan felt a wave of shame wash over him. He had never considered the human cost of his actions, the lives disrupted and shattered by the choices he'd made. It was one thing to read a report, to look at figures on a spreadsheet, but to stand here face to face with the people affected, it was almost unbearable. Carlos guided Ethan through the rest of the village, introducing him to families who had lost their homes, farmers who could no longer work their land, and children who had been displaced from their schools. Each story was a reminder of the pain he had unwittingly caused, each face a testament to the consequences of his ambition. That evening, they returned to a small guest house on the outskirts of the village. Ethan sat alone in his room, his mind racing with images of the day's encounters. He felt as if his entire life had been laid bare, stripped of the illusions he had built around his success. For the first time, he questioned not only his actions but his very identity, the man he had become in pursuit of power and wealth. He picked up his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found Lily's name. He hesitated, his finger hovering over the call button. He wanted to talk to her, to apologize, to tell her that she had been right. But he knew that words would not undo what he had done, that his actions would speak louder than any apology. Instead, he sent her a message. "I'm here in Colombia. I saw what you were talking about. Thank you for helping me see the truth. I owe you an apology, one that I'll work to earn." He hit send, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. He knew it was only a small step, but it was a beginning, a way forward in a journey that would demand much more than words. The next day, Carlos introduced Ethan to the leaders of the displaced communities, offering him a chance to listen to their demands and discuss a plan for reparations. The leaders spoke candidly, their voices filled with anger and distrust, but also a glimmer of hope that perhaps Ethan's presence signaled a change. "We don't need charity," one of the leaders, Javier Torres, said, his voice firm. "We need our homes back. We need the resources to rebuild, to support our families, to restore what we've lost." Ethan nodded, taking notes as he listened. "I understand. I'll work with my company to ensure that you get what you need. I promise you, I will do everything in my power to make this right." Carlos translated, and Javier eyed Ethan, his skepticism giving way to a hint of cautious optimism. "Actions speak louder than words, Mr. Cole. We'll be watching." Ethan met his gaze, feeling a renewed sense of determination. He realized that this was his chance to rebuild not only the village but also himself, to become a man he could be proud of, a man Lily might someday forgive. Boston, a week later. Back in Boston, Lily sat at her desk, staring at the message from Ethan. She had read it dozens of times, each word stirring a mixture of emotions: anger, sadness, and a faint spark of hope. She hadn't expected him to follow through, to take her challenge to heart. But now, as she read his words, she wondered if perhaps he was finally beginning to change. Kate walked into the office, noticing the look on her friend's face. "Everything all right?" she asked, glancing at Lily's phone. Lily nodded slowly. "I think so. Ethan's in Colombia. He's seeing the damage his company has done, facing the people who were affected." Kate raised an eyebrow. "And how do you feel about that?" Lily paused, choosing her words carefully. "I feel relieved, I think, but also sad. Sad for the man he became and the choices he made. I wish he'd never lost sight of who he was." Kate gave her a gentle smile. "Maybe this is his chance to find that person again. And maybe, in a strange way, you helped him see it." Lily nodded, a sense of peace settling within her. She didn't know if they would ever reconcile or if Ethan would truly change, but she felt a small spark of hope that perhaps he was finally on a path toward redemption. And as she sat there, reflecting on the journey that had brought them both to this point, she realized that, regardless of what the future held, she had found her own peace, her own closure. She had done her part to challenge him, to hold him accountable, and now it was up to him to prove that he could be the man he was meant to be. Medellin, Colombia, a month later. Ethan had spent nearly a month in Colombia, immersing himself in the lives of the people affected by his company's decisions. The days were long and challenging, filled with meetings, negotiations, and countless conversations with villagers, community leaders, and activists. He was no longer simply observing. He was working alongside them, finding solutions to restore what had been lost. Carlos, the NGO representative, became both a guide and a mentor. They had formed an unlikely partnership, with Carlos providing insights and advice that helped Ethan gain the community's trust. Slowly, the villagers began to accept Ethan's presence, their initial anger tempered by the tangible actions he was taking to address the harm done. One afternoon, as they stood together overlooking the land that had once been a thriving village, Ethan turned to Carlos. "I want to set up a permanent foundation," he said, his voice steady. "Something that goes beyond just this project. A foundation focused on ethical business practices, on preventing this kind of harm in the future." Carlos nodded, impressed. "If you mean that, it could be a legacy worth leaving. But it will take more than words and plans on paper. It will require real commitment, transparency, and accountability." Ethan finished, his gaze fixed on the land stretching out before them. "I understand that now." Carlos placed a hand on his shoulder, a sign of respect and trust that Ethan hadn't yet earned, but was beginning to glimpse. "If you can follow through on that, you may not only rebuild this village, but also set a new standard for how businesses operate here. It's about time someone did." Ethan felt a spark of hope, a sense of purpose that felt more meaningful than anything he'd experienced before. This wasn't just about redemption. It was about transforming the very foundation of the world he had once thrived in. Boston, weeks later. In her office, Lily clicked through an online news article covering the latest updates on Ethan's foundation and the changes he was implementing in Colombia. The story had gained traction, with headlines focusing on his unexpected transformation and the reparations his company was providing to the displaced communities. As she read, a mix of emotions washed over her: relief, pride, and a lingering sense of melancholy. She hadn't expected him to go this far, to commit so fully to making amends. Part of her had doubted whether he would ever change, but now, seeing his actions unfold, she realized he was becoming the person she'd once believed he could be. Kate walked into her office, catching a glimpse of the article on Lily's screen. "Still keeping tabs on him, I see?" Lily nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "He's really doing it, Kate. He's setting up a foundation, committing to ethical standards, trying to repair the damage he's done." Kate crossed her arms, studying her friend. "And how does that make you feel? Happy? Relieved? Sad?" Lily looked down, considering her answer carefully. "I'm proud of him, I think, but I also feel like there's still a part of me that needs closure. It's hard to explain." Kate gave her a reassuring smile. "Maybe this is the start of that closure. Maybe you'll find it in seeing him truly make a difference." Lily nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle within her. She didn't know what the future held for either of them, but for the first time, she felt a genuine hope that they could both move forward, free from the shadows of their past. Medellin, Colombia. Ethan spent the next several weeks working with Carlos and local leaders to formally establish the foundation, which he named the Future Roots Initiative. The mission was simple yet profound: to ensure that corporate projects in Colombia and beyond would prioritize the welfare of local communities and the environment, rather than solely focusing on profit. The work was grueling but fulfilling, and as the foundation took shape, so did Ethan's sense of purpose. He spent hours listening to villager stories, visiting schools, and helping to rebuild homes destroyed by the project. He documented every step of the journey, ensuring that his company's shareholders and board of directors could see the transformation firsthand. One evening, as he reviewed a report on the foundation's progress, his phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from his former fiancée, Grace. She had seen the news coverage and wanted to check in. Message from Grace. "I saw what you're doing, Ethan. I just wanted to say that I'm glad you're finding your way. I hope this brings you peace." Ethan read the message, feeling a pang of regret, but also relief. Grace had moved on, and now he could too, fully commit to the path he had chosen. This journey, he realized, was as much about healing himself as it was about making amends. Boston. One evening, as Lily was locking up her office, her phone rang. She checked the caller ID, surprised to see Ethan's name. For a moment, she hesitated, her heart pounding with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Finally, she answered, her voice calm and steady. "Hello, Ethan." "Lily, hi," he replied, his voice laced with gratitude. "I wanted to thank you for everything, for pushing me to see what I couldn't see on my own." Lily's voice softened. "You don't have to thank me, Ethan. This journey, you did it yourself. I just pointed you in the right direction." There was a pause, a silence that felt heavy with all the unspoken words between them. "I'm setting up a foundation, Lily. We're working on rebuilding the villages, restoring the land, and creating sustainable practices. I wanted you to know that your words made a difference." Lily felt a swell of emotion, a bittersweet satisfaction. "I'm glad to hear that, Ethan. Truly. Actually," he continued, his tone cautious, "I'd love for you to come and see it for yourself. You were a part of this from the beginning, and I think it would mean a lot to the people here if you visited." Lily hesitated, her mind racing. She had moved on in many ways, but there was still a part of her that felt drawn to his journey, a need to see his transformation firsthand. After a moment, she replied, "All right, I'll come." Medellin, 2 weeks later. Lily arrived in Medellin, her heart pounding as she stepped off the plane and took in the vibrant colors and sounds of the city. Ethan was waiting for her, dressed simply in jeans and a collared shirt, his face tanned from weeks spent outdoors. "Lily," he greeted her, his smile genuine and warm. She returned his smile, feeling a strange sense of familiarity and newness all at once. "Hello, Ethan." They drove out to the village, and as they passed fields of wildflowers and lush greenery, Ethan shared stories of the foundation's progress, the people he'd met, and the changes they had implemented. He spoke with a passion she hadn't seen in him before, a sense of purpose that resonated deeply with her. When they arrived at the village, Lily was struck by the transformation. Homes were being rebuilt, children were playing outside, and villagers greeted her with smiles and nods of gratitude. Ethan introduced her to Carlos, who thanked her for the role she had played in sparking Ethan's journey. "You were the beginning of this change," Carlos said, his tone warm and sincere. "Without your influence, none of this would have happened." Lily felt a wave of emotion, humbled by the impact she hadn't fully realized she'd had. As she walked through the village, meeting families and seeing the resilience of the people, she felt a profound sense of peace and closure. That evening, as she and Ethan sat under a canopy of stars, he turned to her, his voice soft. "Thank you, Lily, for not giving up on me, even when I had given up on myself." She met his gaze, her own eyes filled with gratitude. "You found your way, Ethan, and in doing so, you found a way to make a difference. I'm proud of you." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who had once been everything to each other, now finding solace and forgiveness in the journey they had shared. It wasn't a perfect ending, nor was it a rekindling of old flames. It was something new, a respect, an understanding, and a friendship forged in growth and redemption. As the stars twinkled overhead, they both knew that this was the beginning of a new chapter, a story of purpose and renewal that they had written together, even if they were destined to walk separate paths. Medellin, Colombia. A few months after Lily's visit, the Future Roots initiative was officially launched, receiving support from both local and international organizations. Ethan stood at the front of a crowded room in Medellin's Central Community Center, where reporters, villagers, and colleagues gathered to witness the launch of the foundation that had been months in the making. Carlos introduced Ethan to the crowd, speaking passionately about the journey they had embarked on together. "Future Roots isn't just about rebuilding homes and infrastructure," he said, his voice resonating with conviction. "It's about establishing a future that respects people, communities, and the land. This is the legacy we're building together." Ethan took the stage, feeling a surge of nervous energy mixed with pride. He cleared his throat, glancing briefly at the crowd before finding his voice. "I stand here today not just as a businessman, but as someone who made mistakes that I am working to correct," he began, his voice steady. "Future Roots is my commitment, my promise to do things differently to prioritize people and planet over profit. The room erupted in applause, and as Ethan looked out over the faces in the crowd, he felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. This foundation was no longer just a form of redemption. It had become a mission he was fully committed to, a way to rewrite his legacy and make a lasting difference. Boston. Back in Boston, news of Future Roots began to circulate in corporate circles, sparking a dialogue about ethical responsibility and sustainable practices. Lily watched as headlines praised the initiative, acknowledging Ethan's transformation from a ruthless businessman to a responsible, ethical leader. Though she had stepped back from direct involvement, she still felt a deep connection to the mission. One afternoon, Lily received an invitation from a prestigious law school to give a guest lecture on corporate responsibility and legal ethics. At first, she hesitated, feeling unprepared for the spotlight, but Kate encouraged her to accept. "This is your chance to share your story," Kate said, her tone gentle but firm. "Your perspective, your experiences, they matter. People need to hear what you have to say." After some consideration, Lily agreed, and over the next few weeks, she prepared her presentation. She knew she would speak not only about her own work, but also about the impact that Future Roots had achieved. Ethan's journey had shown her that change was possible, even for those who had lost their way. New York, Conference on Corporate Responsibility. Several months after the launch of Future Roots, Lily traveled to New York to attend a conference on corporate responsibility, where she was scheduled to give her guest lecture. The conference had drawn leaders from various industries, all discussing the importance of ethical practices, transparency, and sustainability. As she prepared to take the stage, she felt a familiar presence in the crowd. Glancing out over the audience, she spotted Ethan, seated near the front, listening intently. Her heart skipped a beat, a mixture of surprise and warmth filling her chest. Taking a deep breath, Lily began her talk, her voice steady and confident. She spoke of the importance of accountability, of the need for businesses to understand their impact on communities and the environment. She shared stories from her legal work, emphasizing the human side of corporate decisions, and concluded by speaking about Future Roots and its mission. "Change is possible," she said, her gaze briefly meeting Ethan's. "It requires courage, commitment, and a willingness to acknowledge past mistakes. But when we choose the right path, we don't just transform our businesses, we transform ourselves." When her lecture ended, the audience erupted into applause. As she stepped off the stage, Ethan approached her, a look of pride and admiration on his face. "Lily, that was incredible," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "You've inspired everyone here, including me." Lily smiled, feeling a sense of pride and contentment. "Thank you, Ethan. It means a lot to me." They shared a quiet moment, each feeling the weight of their shared history, their journey, and the connection they had forged. It was no longer a romantic bond, but something deeper, a mutual respect, a friendship built on shared values and growth. Boston. Lily returned to Boston with a renewed sense of purpose. The lecture had inspired her to expand her legal practice, establishing a dedicated team focused on corporate responsibility and environmental law. Her work became a catalyst for change in the industry, helping companies adopt ethical practices and avoid the pitfalls Ethan had encountered. As Future Roots grew, Lily and Ethan kept in touch, exchanging occasional messages about the progress of their respective projects. They supported each other from afar, each following their own path, but united in their mission to make a difference. Ethan traveled between Medellin and New York, working tirelessly to expand Future Roots' reach. He partnered with other corporations, using his influence to encourage CEOs and investors to prioritize ethical practices. The initiative quickly became a model for sustainable business, and Ethan was frequently invited to speak at conferences, sharing his story and the lessons he had learned. Medellin, Colombia. 1 year after the launch of Future Roots, Ethan returned to the village where his journey had begun. The changes were undeniable. New homes dotted the landscape. Children played in vibrant community parks, and farmers tended to their crops in revitalized fields. The village was thriving, a testament to the resilience of the people and the commitment of the foundation. Carlos joined him, a look of satisfaction on his face as he surveyed the progress. "We did it, Ethan," he said, his tone filled with pride. "Together, we built something that will outlast us." Ethan nodded, feeling a profound sense of fulfillment. "This was never just about making amends," he said quietly. "It's about creating something that gives back, something that helps others grow." Carlos smiled, clapping him on the shoulder. "Then I'd say you've succeeded." As they walked through the village, Ethan spotted Maria Alvarez, the elderly woman who had confronted him during his first visit. She approached him, her face softened by time and forgiveness. "Mr. Cole," she said, her tone respectful yet warm. "Thank you for what you've done here. My grandchildren have a future now because of you." Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat, touched by her words. "Thank you, Maria. I'm grateful to have had the chance to make things right." They shared a moment of mutual respect, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had both taken. For Ethan, it was a moment of closure, a reminder that he had finally earned the forgiveness he had once thought impossible. Boston, a few months later. Back in Boston, Lily received a letter from Ethan, a handwritten note that brought a small, nostalgic smile to her face. Letter from Ethan. "Dear Lily, I wanted to thank you once again. Future Roots has changed my life, and I owe so much of it to your influence, your words. I don't know if we'll ever cross paths again, but I want you to know that I'm grateful for everything you've given me. You helped me find a purpose, and I hope you know that your impact has reached far beyond the work you do. Thank you, Lily. Yours always in friendship, Ethan." Reading his words, Lily felt a deep sense of peace. She knew that this chapter of their lives had reached a natural conclusion, that they had both found the strength to move forward. She tucked the letter away, feeling grateful for the journey they had shared, for the way they had helped each other grow. Boston. Months later, Lily attended the ribbon-cutting ceremony for a new community center in Boston, a project her law firm had helped fund. The center was dedicated to providing resources for underprivileged families, offering a safe space for children and support services for parents. As she watched the families explore the center, she felt a deep sense of purpose, knowing she was making a difference in her own way. She glanced at her phone, seeing a message from Kate. "Congrats on the opening. You're doing amazing work." Smiling, Lily put her phone away and turned back to the crowd, her heart filled with a quiet joy. This was her path, her way of honoring the journey she had shared with Ethan and the lessons they had both learned. Their lives had taken different directions, but their friendship had left an indelible mark on her heart. Medellin. Ethan spent the remainder of his days in Medellin, dedicating himself to expanding Future Roots and ensuring that its mission endured. He watched as the foundation's reach grew, helping villages across Colombia and beyond. He became a mentor to other business leaders, guiding them toward ethical practices and sustainable development. On his office wall, he kept a single-framed photograph, a picture of himself and Lily from years ago, taken during their college days. It served as a reminder of where he had come from, of the person he had once been and the man he had become. It was a symbol of his journey, his legacy, and the enduring impact of the one person who had changed his life forever. Medellin, Colombia, 1 year later. The village was alive with color and music as the annual Harvest Festival brought families, friends, and neighbors together to celebrate the year's bounty. The Future Roots Foundation had played a pivotal role in restoring the community's agricultural roots, providing resources and training for sustainable farming. Ethan stood among the villagers, feeling a sense of belonging he had never known before. Children ran through the fields, laughing as they chased each other, while elders told stories around a large bonfire. Ethan was helping set up tables filled with local dishes when he heard a familiar voice behind him. "Ethan," Lily called, her voice carrying over the crowd. He turned, a smile spreading across his face as he saw her approaching. She looked radiant, her expression warm as she took in the scene before her. He walked over, greeting her with a hug, and for a moment, they simply stood there, enjoying the peace of the moment. "I wasn't sure you'd make it," he said, pulling back to look at her. "It means a lot to have you here." Lily smiled, her gaze drifting over the bustling crowd. "I wouldn't have missed it. This is beautiful, Ethan. You've built something truly meaningful." They walked together through the festival, greeting villagers who thanked Lily for her influence in Ethan's life. She felt a mix of pride and humility, realizing that her part in this story had helped change lives far beyond what she could have imagined. As the night fell, they joined the villagers around the bonfire, listening to traditional songs and watching dancers perform under the starlit sky. It was a celebration of resilience, of unity, and of the future they were all building together. Late night, Medellin. After the festival ended, Ethan and Lily walked back to the guest house where she was staying. The night was quiet, the sounds of the celebration fading into the distance as they walked in comfortable silence. They sat on a small bench overlooking the fields, and Ethan broke the silence, his voice soft. "You know, I owe so much of this to you. If you hadn't pushed me to confront my choices, I don't think I would have ever found this path." Lily looked at him, her expression gentle. "I think you would have found it eventually, Ethan. It was always within you. You just needed a reminder of who you were meant to be." He nodded, a look of peace in his eyes. "Thank you, Lily, for being that reminder." They shared a quiet moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Lily spoke, her tone reflective. "You've built something incredible here. You don't need me to tell you that, but I want you to know how proud I am of you." Ethan's gaze softened. "And I'm proud of you. You've always had the strength to stand up for what's right. That's something I've always admired about you." They sat in silence, the weight of their shared journey lingering in the air. They had come so far, each growing into the person they were meant to be. And though their paths were diverging once again, they knew they would always be connected by the experiences they had shared. Boston, 6 months later. Lily returned to Boston with a renewed sense of purpose, inspired by her time in Medellin and the work Ethan had accomplished. Her law firm expanded its focus on environmental and human rights cases, establishing a scholarship fund to support young lawyers committed to ethical advocacy. One afternoon, she was invited to a press event at a university, where she was awarded for her contributions to corporate responsibility. As she accepted the award, she spoke about the importance of accountability, of standing up for those without a voice, and of the need for lasting change in the business world. "It's not enough to seek profit," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "We must seek purpose, a reason to use our influence for good. Because when we stand up for what is right, we make a difference that reaches far beyond our own lives." The audience erupted in applause, and as she stepped down from the podium, she felt a sense of peace and fulfillment. She had found her own path, a way to honor the lessons she had learned and the impact she hoped to leave behind. Medellin, 1 year later. Ethan stood on the terrace of the Future Roots office in Medellin, overlooking the bustling community below. The foundation had grown, establishing partnerships across Latin America, supporting sustainable practices, and providing resources to communities in need. Future Roots had become a model for ethical business, inspiring other companies to adopt similar practices. As he watched villagers going about their daily routines, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. This was the legacy he had chosen, the path he had carved out of his past mistakes. It wasn't perfect, and he still had much to learn, but he was proud of the work he was doing and the lives he was helping to change. On his desk sat a framed photograph of himself and Lily from college, a reminder of the journey that had brought him here. He often thought of her, wondering where her path would take her next, grateful for the friendship they had rekindled and the difference she had made in his life. Boston. One quiet evening, as Lily organized her files at home, she found a letter she had once written to herself during her college years. It was filled with hopes, dreams, and a promise to always stay true to her values, to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. She smiled, realizing how much she had grown since then. Her journey had taken unexpected turns, leading her to places she hadn't anticipated, but she had found her purpose, her way of making a difference in the world. And in doing so, she had helped others, including Ethan, find their own way. Taking out a new sheet of paper, she wrote a letter to her future self, a reminder to continue her journey with purpose and compassion. It was a small ritual, but it grounded her, reminding her of the impact she could make. Medellin. As the sun set over the village, Ethan received a notification on his phone, an article from a law journal featuring Lily's recent work and her contributions to corporate responsibility. He read the article with pride, a sense of gratitude filling him as he reflected on the journey they had shared. He sent her a brief message, saw the article. "You're making a difference. Proud of you, Lily." Her reply was simple but heartfelt. "Thank you, Ethan. And thank you for finding your path. We're both exactly where we need to be." They hadn't seen each other in months, and they might never cross paths again. But there was a peace in knowing they had helped each other grow, that they had found a way to honor the connection they had once shared. Years later, Lily stood in her law firm's conference room, looking out over the city. Her firm had grown, becoming a leader in ethical advocacy, and she had made a name for herself as a voice for accountability in the business world. She often thought of Ethan, wondering if he felt the same sense of fulfillment, the same quiet pride in his work. One day, she received an invitation from Future Roots, a gala event celebrating their 10-year anniversary. She considered attending, but she realized she didn't need to. Their journey had come full circle, and she knew in her heart that they had both found peace. As she placed the invitation in a drawer, she smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the journey she had taken and the impact she had made. She had found her own legacy, one built on compassion, integrity, and purpose. Medellin, Future Roots Anniversary. Ethan stood at the center of the crowd, the celebration of Future Roots Anniversary, a vibrant display of the foundation's achievements. Children laughed as they played, families gathered to share stories, and partners from around the world joined in the festivities. He glanced at the crowd, feeling the weight of the journey that had brought him here. As he looked out over the crowd, he thought of Lily, the woman who had once been his compass, his anchor, and his guide. She had given him a gift he could never repay, a reminder of his potential, of the good he was capable of. He raised his glass, a silent toast to the one who had changed his life and the legacy they had built together. Though their paths had diverged, they had both found their purpose, and in doing so, they had created a story of redemption, of growth, and of enduring friendship. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey with Ethan and Lily, a story of growth, redemption, and finding purpose. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful tales that inspire and uplift. Leave a like if this story resonated with you, and share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you do if faced with a similar path to redemption? Your participation helps us keep creating meaningful content. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.